In 2024, real people face the unimaginable. From sudden disappearances to encounters that defy explanation, these are the true stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew. Who, or what, was behind these terrifying events? Stay with us as we dive into the darkest mysteries of the year. In October 2024, an unsettling haunted house attraction in Walsall, England, known as Enola, shocked thrill-seekers with its intense and disturbing experience. Promoted as one of the scariest haunted houses in Britain, it promised to push the boundaries of fear, leaving participants questioning the line between reality and horror. It was marketed as an experience like no other. The Enola Haunted House, located in the heart of Walsall, promised an encounter that would break down participants' psychological defenses and leave them forever changed. For those seeking a true test of courage, it was a place where terror became real, not just a scripted performance. The attraction opened in early October 2024, immediately drawing attention for its extreme approach. Advertised as a psychological horror experience, it was designed for adults only, with a waiver that warned of its disturbing content. But even with the waiver in place, no one could have anticipated the depths of fear they were about to endure. Liam Gould, a local who had been an avid fan of haunted house attractions, was among the first to book a ticket. He arrived at the entrance of Enola, greeted by an ominous, almost oppressive atmosphere. The building itself, a dilapidated structure with flickering lights and strange noises emanating from within, seemed to be alive with the anticipation of something terrifying. Once inside, Liam was led into a dimly lit room where he was instructed to remove his shoes and leave behind his personal belongings. The staff, dressed in tattered clothing and wearing grotesque masks, warned him that there was no turning back once the experience began. But Liam, fueled by excitement and a thirst for the ultimate horror experience, didn't hesitate. He was escorted through a series of 6 themed rooms, each designed to push his limits. The first room, themed around isolation, was eerily silent. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and Liam was made to sit in a chair in the center of the room. Without warning, an actor dressed as a deranged figure in a straitjacket approached him. The actor shouted at him, taunting him with personal insults that cut deep, exploiting his fears and insecurities. The actor's eyes were wide and unblinking, creating an atmosphere of tension that made Liam's heart race. The second room was even more unnerving. It was pitch black, and Liam was led by a staff member who whispered into his ear, encouraging him to follow blindly. The walls closed in around him as he navigated the narrow space, hearing faint sounds of movement behind him. When he finally reached the center of the room, he was locked in a cage, and a terrifying figure loomed over him, its breath hot and foul. He could barely make out the figure's face, but its chilling laughter reverberated in the darkness. But the horror escalated when Liam was taken to the third room, sensory deprivation. In this room, he was strapped to a chair, blindfolded, and headphones were placed over his ears. The room was filled with white noise, a high-pitched ringing that made his skin crawl. The sounds of a baby crying, a woman screaming, and a man whispering vile threats pierced through the noise. The intense discomfort left him disoriented, unable to trust his senses. He could feel something brush against his face, but when he reached out, there was nothing there. The fourth room was called Revelation, and it brought Liam face to face with his deepest fears. He was made to sit in front of a mirror, which slowly began to distort his reflection. As he watched, his face morphed into that of a monstrous figure, one he recognized as a person from his past. The mirror then shattered, and Liam was left alone in the chaos, hearing a voice call his name from the darkness. The fifth room was perhaps the most physically invasive. The actors, now becoming more aggressive, began to strip Liam of his personal space. His shirt was ripped off, and his arms were bound. A staff member applied hot wax to his chest and stomach, pulling it off with painful precision. Then, an electric shock was administered, making his muscles contract involuntarily. The pain was sharp, intense, and unexpected. Finally, Liam reached the last room, which was labeled Mercy. He had been pushed to his emotional and physical limits, but he had not yet said the safe word. The actors surrounding him grew more menacing, yelling at him to break. He could see others in the room, also trapped in their own fears. When the pressure became unbearable, Liam finally shouted the word mercy. It was a relief to hear the actors retreat, their presence no longer suffocating. The experience left Liam shaken. As he exited the building, he was met by others who had just gone through the ordeal. Some were visibly shaking, unable to speak, while others were in tears. One participant, a woman named Sarah, had passed out during the experience and had to be carried out. For many, the terror was not just a thrill, it was a trauma. In the days following, stories of what transpired inside Enola began to spread. News outlets reported on the intense emotional distress and physical pain participants endured. Some described feeling as if they were no longer in control of their bodies, with one person describing how the actors read their minds by using deeply personal information. Psychologists later weighed in, suggesting that the experience blurred the lines between fantasy and reality in a way that could have long-lasting psychological effects. Liam, still grappling with what he had endured, expressed that he would never look at haunted houses the same way again. He said, "I signed up for a thrill, but what I got was far beyond anything I could have imagined. It wasn't fun, it was like being trapped in my worst nightmare." Enola Haunted House closed shortly after, with many questioning whether such extreme experiences should even exist. But for those who survived, the scars left behind were more than just physical, they were psychological. A reminder that sometimes the scariest things aren't what we see but what we feel deep inside. In early 2024, a group of college friends ventured into the remote woods of Oregon for a weekend getaway, unaware that they were about to encounter something far darker than they had anticipated. The story of their terrifying experience has since become one of the most chilling tales to emerge from the Pacific Northwest. The idea seemed harmless at first. 5 college friends seeking a break from their busy lives, renting a cabin deep in the Oregon woods. The cabin was secluded, tucked away miles from the nearest town, a perfect place to unwind and escape the noise of the world. It was the kind of place where they could bond, enjoy the peace of nature, and perhaps indulge in a little spooky fun. But from the moment they arrived, things felt off. The cabin itself, though rustic and charming on the surface, had an unsettling aura. The floorboards creaked in odd places, the air was thick with the scent of mildew, and there was an old, lingering mustiness in the walls. Still, they brushed it off as part of the cabin's charm. The remote location only added to the allure. No distractions, just the great outdoors, and each other. On the first night after unpacking and settling in, the group gathered around the fireplace to share stories and enjoy a few drinks. As they laughed and chatted, the wind outside began to pick up, howling through the trees in a way that sounded almost like whispers. One of the friends, Kyle, joked about the eerie sounds, but no one laughed. They could feel it, the unease creeping in, just beyond the warmth of the firelight. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, they began to hear faint noises from upstairs, soft thuds and dragging sounds, as if someone was walking around. Initially they dismissed it as the wind or perhaps the house settling, but the noises grew louder, more deliberate. At 3 a.m., Sarah, one of the friends, woke up to the sound of heavy footsteps pacing outside her bedroom door. Terrified, she called out to her friends, but when they rushed to her side, there was no one there. The footsteps stopped abruptly, as if they had never been there. But the tension in the air remained thick, as though something unseen was watching them. The next morning, Sarah was visibly shaken, but she didn't want to alarm the others. She assumed it had been a dream, a product of too much wine and an overactive imagination. However, things began to escalate on the second night. This time, the group decided to venture into the nearby woods for a nighttime hike, hoping the fresh air would clear their minds. But as they wandered deeper into the forest, they felt an overwhelming sense of being watched. The trees, once inviting and peaceful, now loomed over them like dark sentinels. It was as if the woods themselves were alive, closing in on them. They reached a clearing and noticed something odd, a small dilapidated shack that wasn't marked on any of their maps. The shack appeared abandoned, yet there was an eerie energy surrounding it. Curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to investigate. Inside they found old rotting furniture and strange symbols carved into the walls, symbols that seemed to pulsate with a strange energy, as if they were alive. Kyle, the most skeptical of the group, mocked the symbols and dared his friends to touch them. But when he did, the air around them grew cold, and the door slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside. The group panicked, desperately trying to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was as though something, or someone, was preventing them from leaving. After what felt like an eternity, the door suddenly creaked open on its own. The friends rushed out of the shack, breathless and terrified, but the strange feeling of being watched persisted. They quickly returned to the cabin, feeling as though they had narrowly escaped something far worse. That night, the horrors in the cabin escalated. As they tried to sleep, the same dragging footsteps returned, now accompanied by low whispers, as though someone was speaking in a language none of them understood. Kyle, who had been dismissive of the supernatural, was the first to break. He was convinced something malevolent was in the cabin with them. The group tried to leave, but their car wouldn't start. Panic set in as they realized they were stranded, alone in the middle of nowhere, with no way to contact the outside world. The phone lines were down, and their GPS had stopped working, leaving them with no means of escape. In the dead of night, as the temperature dropped and the whispers grew louder, Sarah heard something she would never forget, a voice, faint but clear, coming from the darkened hallway. "Get out! Now!" The voice was unmistakable, and it sounded like a warning, one that they couldn't ignore. With no other choice, they decided to leave on foot, heading toward the main road, hoping to find help. As they trudged through the woods, the feeling of being hunted intensified. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent their hearts racing. They could feel eyes on them, unseen but unmistakably present. After what felt like hours, they stumbled upon a ranger station and were able to get help. The rangers took them back to the cabin to retrieve their belongings, but when they arrived, the cabin was completely different. The windows were shattered, the door was ajar, and the inside was filled with an overwhelming sense of malevolence. The cabin was no longer the rustic getaway it had once been. It was a place of pure evil. The rangers told them they weren't the first to experience such things. Several years earlier, a family had rented the cabin and disappeared without a trace. The rangers had been unable to find any evidence of foul play, but they believed the cabin had been built on land cursed by the Native Americans who once lived in the area. The group left Oregon in a state of shock, but they couldn't escape the feeling that something had followed them. They continued to have strange dreams, waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps pacing just outside their doors. The story of their terrifying weekend getaway spread quickly, and the cabin was soon abandoned again, left to rot in the woods. But some locals believe that the curse of the cabin still lingers, and those who dare to visit may find themselves trapped in the same nightmare the friends experienced in 2024. In the summer of 2024, a group of paranormal investigators ventured into the long-abandoned Riverside Asylum in upstate New York, hoping to document the supernatural events rumored to occur within its decaying walls. What they uncovered was far more terrifying than they could have imagined. The Riverside Asylum had been abandoned for over 40 years, yet it remained a subject of fascination and fear among locals. Situated on the outskirts of a quiet town in upstate New York, the asylum had a dark history. Originally built in the 1800s as a mental institution, it had housed thousands of patients over the years, many of whom had suffered horrific treatment. Stories of abuse, experimental procedures, and unexplained deaths haunted the asylum's past. But in 2024, it was the rumors of something far worse that brought a group of paranormal investigators to its doorstep. The team, led by seasoned investigator Claire Thompson, had heard whispers of strange occurrences, disembodied voices, eerie shadows, and cold spots that plagued anyone brave enough to enter. Local legends spoke of the Shadow Man, a dark figure seen lurking in the hallways, and the tormented souls of patients who never left. The asylum was now a place where few dared to tread, yet the team was determined to uncover the truth. They arrived on a cold, foggy evening, the sun barely setting behind the towering, crumbling structure. The building loomed over them, its windows boarded up and the ivy-covered walls giving it an otherworldly appearance. Despite the beauty of the surrounding woods, there was a palpable sense of dread in the air, as though the very land itself was haunted. Inside, the asylum was a decaying maze of dark hallways, rusted medical equipment, and long-forgotten rooms. The investigators set up their equipment, cameras, motion sensors, and EVP, electronic voice phenomenon recorders, ready to capture whatever paranormal activity awaited them. It didn't take long for the atmosphere to shift. As Claire and her team explored the main floor, they began to feel an unsettling coldness, far colder than the outside air. The air felt thick, almost oppressive, as if something was watching them. They heard faint footsteps echoing through the halls, but when they turned the corner, there was no one there. In the first room they investigated, the temperature dropped drastically. The infrared cameras picked up strange shapes moving in the shadows, shapes that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. Claire, a skeptic at heart, chalked it up to faulty equipment, until they heard the voice. It was soft at first, barely audible, a woman's voice, pleading for help. The team froze. The voice seemed to come from behind the walls, but there was no one there. They rushed to the room's exit only to find that the door wouldn't open. It was as if something was holding them inside. Panic began to set in, but after what felt like an eternity, the door finally creaked open on its own. The investigators moved deeper into the asylum, and that's when the true horror began. In the upper floors, they encountered what seemed to be a long-abandoned ward for the mentally ill. The rooms were filled with broken furniture, rusty beds, and unsettling drawings on the walls. Drawings of twisted figures, grotesque faces, and eyes watching from every corner. But the worst was yet to come. As Claire walked into one of the patient rooms, she felt a sudden, intense pressure on her chest. Her breathing became shallow and a deep, growling voice whispered in her ear, "Leave! Now!" She staggered back, gasping for air, and turned to find one of her team members, Michael, staring at a shadowy figure standing at the far end of the room. The figure was tall, its face obscured by darkness, but its presence was unmistakable. The shadow seemed to move toward them, gliding effortlessly across the room. Claire reached for her camera to document it, but as she did, the figure vanished, leaving only a lingering chill in the air. The team was shaken, but they pressed on, hoping to find an explanation for the terrifying events they had witnessed. As the night wore on, the team discovered more disturbing evidence of the asylum's dark history. They found old medical records detailing horrific treatments performed on patients, lobotomies, electroshock therapy, and other experiments designed to break the human spirit. Some of the patients listed in the records had never been discharged, their fates unknown. Claire couldn't help but feel that the spirits of these lost souls still lingered in the asylum, trapped in the walls by the trauma they had endured. In the basement, the investigators stumbled upon a hidden room, its door concealed behind a stack of old furniture. Inside, they found what appeared to be an old, dilapidated operating theater. The room was filled with rusted surgical tools and remnants of bloodstains that had long since dried. But it was the center of the room that drew their attention. A large wooden chair with leather straps, stained and worn from years of use. The EVP recorders suddenly began to pick up more voices. This time a chorus of whispers, all saying the same thing, "Don't sit in the chair." Claire, feeling an overwhelming urge to leave, motioned for the team to head back to the entrance. But as they made their way down the hallway, they heard something that made their blood run cold, footsteps behind them growing louder with every step. When they turned to confront whatever was following them, they saw nothing. Yet the footsteps continued, now accompanied by the sound of dragging chains. It was as if the spirits of the asylum's past were chasing them, unwilling to let them leave. In the distance, they could hear the unmistakable sound of a door slamming shut. The investigators rushed out of the asylum, hearts pounding, and barely made it to their van before the front door slammed shut with a deafening crash. As they drove away, they glanced back at the building. In the top window, they could swear they saw a shadowy figure staring out at them. Claire and her team have never returned to Riverside Asylum, but their footage and recordings tell a terrifying story. The voices they captured were chilling, but it was the physical presence of the shadowy figure that haunted them most. They left the asylum with more questions than answers, but one thing was certain: something in those walls was not ready to be forgotten. The Riverside Asylum remains abandoned, its walls echoing with the lost souls of those who suffered within. And some say that if you listen closely enough, you can still hear the footsteps in the halls, chasing after those who dare to uncover its dark secrets. What do you think happened in these cases? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're hungry for more chilling true stories, be sure to check out our next video for even more unsolved mysteries that will keep you up at night.